The field of forest conservation was focused on trying to save old growth on public lands and to stop clear cutting, and that was it.
The world sort of consisted of confrontation, regulation, litigation. The battles were mostly over old growth.
But in some senses, that battle had already been lost. We were down to a half of a percent of old growth on private lands. There was a much bigger and hidden crisis in forests, that we were losing forests at an extraordinary rate.
Time is money, and forests take a lot of time. You were going to have a clash between the biological needs of the forest and the economic needs of forest owners and forest communities.
By changing the discussion to say, how could we manage forests to have the function of old growth? Because we're never going to go back 200 years and start all over. How could we restore that through actively managing forests and actively working with landowners and finding ways to pay them money because they own these lands as a part of their living? So that was something that nobody had been doing.
We started by taking a tool that was known, the conservation easement, and saying, how can we apply that to a working forest? So it's not just a set-aside.
Then everybody gets their goals. You keep the lands as forest, you manage it for all its values, timber keeps coming off the property, people are employed, mills run, furniture is made.
I'm the sixth generation, and my great-great-grandmother, her brothers came out here as teenagers, and they started the Hart Ranch, and it started in the valley, the Little Shasta Valley. There have been moments where we were really worried with various regulations and passing on from generation to generation. My dad was really starting to take over control of all the management aspects at that point.
I listened to a presentation that Connie gave, the California Forest Landowners Association.
And watched her presentation and was just floored by the conviction and the science, and that it was good science, and that trying to make it work with the landowners. And they truly understand and they believe that there's a working side of the property that needs to be maintained, and it takes money. And the conservation easement with Pacific Forest Trust helped with that financial burden. Years and years to come, we're going to continue to see how that has affected things, and we are so thankful.
A month after we acquired the conservation easement and assured that this property would stay as beautiful and intact as it is, we learned about the first wolf pack in California being found in a den with pups, and that was on this property. We think of wild and working as like worlds apart. This is Pacific Forest Trust's place. We show that they are not so different. Wilderness, wildness occurs in a working landscape with really wonderful stewardship by these owners.
Now, carbon credits as a way to clean up the air.
Forests and the degradation of forests is the second largest cause of CO2 emissions.
You cannot solve the climate crisis without the help of forests. It's not going to happen. You could stop auto emissions, fossil fuels today, and there'd still be dangerous levels of CO2 in the air. Only forests can scrub it out in a way that will keep this a livable planet.
I got to know PFT because Lori Wayburn came to me when I was the director of the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. And she brought a bill asking for my support, which combined all the mission and the ideas that I cared about too. And this is where the forest carbon offsets and the California carbon market first got their start.
I first met Lori Wayburn and learned about the work of PFT when I was Secretary for Resources in the Davis administration, and Andrea Tuttle, who was then the head of the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, brought Lori Wayburn in to talk with me about the trust.
We called it Senate Bill 812, carried by Senator Byron Scheer, that created the mechanism for forests to be included in the idea of offsets in a cap and trade system.
This was not a time when many people were making the link between climate change and the need to save forests.
The work that you've done with carbon here in California and the role of forests and making carbon actually a market is tremendously important.
This little idea in California has now become accepted, and we have projects throughout the country.
Their greatest breakthrough accomplishment was in developing and designing the system for California climate change policy to include the protection of carbon in forests. That is transformational both for California but for conservation all across the country.
Today I'm declaring a drought emergency in the state of California.
We've done a lot of work around Mount Shasta. That huge volcano is just the great water store of the state. And so we have been protecting springs and forested watersheds all around Mount Shasta.
The way that forests more naturally attract and hold and transport water, that's something that we can characterize. And we need to recognize that and pay for it. So what we've been doing at PFT is working with policymakers and lawmakers to get source watersheds recognized legally as part of our water infrastructure.
And the legislation that we recently sponsored and got passed by the California legislature says forested watersheds at the source of our water are as much part of the state's water system as those big dams. That's an important step to taking care of those forests and making sure that they're really functioning and providing the water that we need.
PFT's focus over the next years is increasingly on managing forests for these kinds of services, like providing cool, clean water for the future.
The most important thing that Pacific Forest Trust has done so far is to actually do something on the ground and not just talk about it.
They get things done because they have the skills to get things done, far in excess of many other organizations who are strong on emotion and passion, but not so strong on the technical competencies of getting things done in the environmental arena.
What I really appreciate about Pacific Forest Trust is how vital the organization has been in bringing people together to conserve irreplaceable forest landscapes. And I'm talking about landowners, government officials, environmental advocates.
They take into account future changes that we understand or don't understand that are going to affect those forest environments going out 100 years and beyond. So all of that is captured in the way that they create conservation easements and the way they embrace policy that looks at watersheds and climate and biodiversity all at the same time.
Pacific Forest Trust is the most effective organization that I've encountered at bringing ecologically based practices to private forest lands.
They are leaders in innovation in developing the systems that expand land conservation across the country.
Americans across the country owe a debt of gratitude for the Pacific Forest Trust's unwavering commitment to protecting our natural inheritance for generations to come.
So thank you, PFT, congratulations, and look forward to working you for many more years in the future.
So thanks and congratulations, PFT.
We are so grateful to the myriad partners that have made all of our work possible.